Hello everybody, here we are today talking about a trade that I feel like is pretty important between the Seattle Kraken and the Tampa Bay Lightning. And this is something that as the deadline approached, I had wondered maybe if the Kraken would be a big time seller. They're not nearly as high in the standings as they wanted to be. Tampa Bay, I was a little bit more curious to see how aggressive they would be towards the deadline. And this move, I think, is pretty big as you see Bjorkstrand and Yanni Gourde shipped off to Tampa Bay. And then you see a good amount of picks go over to Seattle, and we'll see how this kind of plays out for both teams. And for Tampa Bay, I think this is a big win now move. This is a team that does certainly have some age, especially to their key guys. Aside from guys like Hagel and Point, I think a lot of these guys are certainly in the latter stages of their career. And in this move with getting Yanni Gourde over Bjorkstrand in the short term, this really does help out for them. And it's kind of interesting because Yanni is a player that previously played on both of these cup-winning teams in Tampa Bay and is a player that you already know what you're getting. And I think for a coach like John Cooper especially, that has coached so many pivotal moments, it's nice to have a guy that you can already lean on a little bit. And it feels more of the we're getting the band back together moment as guys like McDonough are back, and then players like Kucherov, and then of course Hedman are still there with this team. And then of course with Oliver Bjorkstrand, kind of what we talked about before already, maybe a guy that isn't going to put up some massive numbers, but still a good two-way player that is going to get you 20 goals, and a player that I think specifically for this Tampa Bay team is going to play a big impact for them. And I know that he may never end up being the guy that is probably going to take over for a team, and that's all right because he is a good kind of, I hate to say role player, but somebody who's going to provide depth for this team. And while I think in the short term this is going to be a really good thing for Tampa Bay, of course you're going to have the people say, man, what about the future? But for me, I kind of look at this as Tampa Bay is a side that before this deal really was going to be leaning on those stars like Point, and then of course Kucherov and some of these other players to have a practically perfect postseason run to even get them there to the Stanley Cup final, possibly win it. And with this deal, it kind of lessens that load a little bit. It's still not perfect, but it's still probably a step in the right direction if they want to reemerge as a cup contender. Meanwhile, for Seattle, this is a little bit disheartening, I think, for the fans that wanted to contend right away. The playoffs from 2023 weren't that long ago. That season was pretty good, and they were hoping for a rebound after a disappointing season last year. But I think that with this trade, it kind of signifies maybe they are headed towards a rebuild. And I know that's always an unpopular thing in sports, but out of all this, you get a second-round pick and 2 first-round picks, not too shabby for guys that are going to be free agents relatively soon. I think Gourde is a free agent after this season is up, and then Bjorkstrand is under contract through the end of next year. So you end up getting, good pieces for the future, possibly in a draft that could certainly help you out more than what you're doing right now, where it feels like they were stuck in a little bit of a rut. They had some pieces where you said, well, this is a good player here and a good player here, but ultimately they weren't doing anything. They were just kind of meddling, and they weren't even, close to a playoff spot at the moment. So now they get to focus on the future, and Tampa Bay gets to focus on the now, and I think that this is certainly in retaliation, or I guess a response to what you saw for the Lightning after the Florida Panthers ended up acquiring Seth Jones. The East is up for grabs. I still think there are probably less teams than people want to admit that could actually go out there and win it. But Tampa Bay is streaking right now. They just had an 8-game win streak that I think ironically was snapped by Florida and a 2-1 loss. But if you realize that there are only a handful of teams, and you could say, well, we might be a little bit closer to that handful of teams and some other teams, and we just got better, while another team like Florida is dealing with the loss of Matthew Tkachuk for a good amount of time, then you feel a little bit more confident that you could maybe be one of those teams that is able to take a run out of the Eastern Conference. Again, Toronto may not be as good as they were before. I think Carolina is a team that, of course, has dealt with losses in the offseason, and with a team like Florida, which we've already talked about for the course of the channel, a lot of deep playoff runs, but I'm sure a lot of players that are a little bit more tired, a little bit more banged up, and maybe don't have the hunger as much as a team like Tampa Bay that's been left out in the cold a little bit. Yes, they won those championships, but they've had Stanley Cup final loss and then 2 first-round losses after that. Some of these players knowing that their best chance to win may be in front of them right now. So I think that this trade will probably definitely need to be graded, especially on the front end of this, as this playoff run especially could be absolutely pivotal for the Bolts. Now, does this guarantee that the Lightning are going to win the Eastern Conference? Not necessarily, but I do think that it makes things a little bit more unique in the Eastern Conference, where some of these other sides say, what do we have to do to be aggressive? What do we have to do in order to try to get ourselves over that hump? You see a team like Washington, how aggressive do they want to be? They say, well, how many runs do we have left with Ovi? How does this team stack up in the future? Even though we've got a lot of these team-friendly deals, you see a team like Carolina that says, well, we've never got over the hump in the true sense of winning the Eastern Conference. You see a team like Toronto, with this being the last run of what we've seen with the roster, probably with Tavares and Marner, Nylander and Matthews, with this kind of core, it all shakes up to what I think could lead to a crazy period leading up to the deadline. And I don't know, because at the end of the day, the East is just so unpredictable right now that you could probably throw out, whatever one of 4 or 5 teams that say could win it. And I could say realistically, maybe they could, but are the Bullets there now? I can't say definitively. Are they a little bit closer than they were yesterday? I think so, and I think that is important for them because what we've already said before with the Lightning, are they going to be a team that is going to be really good in 5 years? Probably not. And they've shown before that they want to try to at least be competitive in these next few years. They wouldn't have signed, Jake Kinsel to that long-term extension, traded to get him. They wouldn't have been able to keep some of the names they had if they wouldn't have said we're going to try to win. So I think with John Cooper and his guys, they are getting a little bit of extra help, trying to gear up for maybe the final push. Again, I'm not sure. I think that I had written them off before. And with this move, am I going to put them back there in that mix? I don't know. Because again, in my eyes, are you getting good Vasi or are you getting maybe not so great Vasi? Because Vasi will probably decide a lot of this. But for both teams, maybe they end up happy here. If Tampa Bay wins another championship, obviously they end up happy. If Seattle is able to use these picks in the right way, that's going to be good. I think for the Kraken, things ended up pretty well for them, all things considered. And I think for Tampa Bay, it's more of the allure of what could the future hold out for us for this playoff run. And then maybe next year, as I believe Bjorkstrand is again under contract. But I don't know. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this trade? Who do you think won and why? Let me know down below in the comments. Also, please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new. Everybody stay safe. Have a great night. And you love hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.